John Bowden, Rock History Music, Rock History Canada. Hello, everybody. I've been coming on at night a lot lately because the days are full of editing videos. In the last few days, just to let you know, we've been editing Richie Henman, who has High Adventure, his a new book. Richie's the original drummer for the band April Wine. And had a lot of other adventures in music. If you think he's a one-trick pony, man, this guy's done an awful lot. And this clip, this is just sort of a sneak preview of our David Henman, his brother, the guitarist. He was also a vocalist. Everyone sang in April 1 except Richie in the beginning. So it was basically Jim Henman, their cousin, Richie and Dave's, who were brothers, their cousin Jim, and Miles Goodwin, started in Nova Scotia, late 1969. One of the greatest Canadian bands of all time. Stood the test of time, that's for sure. Let me just get to your comments here. And I like to, and I love the fact. Hey, Neutral 69, how you doing, man? I got some April Wine albums. I've got my Electric Jewels. This is the last album that Richie and David Henman played on. Jim Henman, the cousin, was only on the first album, but ended up playing with Miles Goodwin an awful lot in the latter part of his life. He chose Jim to play with, and Jim was the bass player of April Wine. What we're going to concentrate on in this sneak preview, we're not going to be on, we're going to try to keep it under an hour. The sneak preview of talking to David. I was just talking to David today about putting this on, and now, boy, what is it? It's 7, 8, 9, 10. It's probably 10, 11 in Nova Scotia right now. So as far, I think he's in Nova Scotia. I don't know if he stayed there. Anyone who grew up with me would know that my favorite Canadian band was always April Wine. There was never, when I became conscious of music, April Wine was my favorite Canadian band right off the bat. It was on the On Record album, their second album, which is basically a record with their faces sort of indelibly stamped, all four of them. Jim Clench, the bass player, he replaced Jim Henman on the second album. Jim's like Miles up in heaven now, if you believe in that kind of thing. I believe in the afterlife, so I think they're jamming together. So it was Jim Clench, David Henman, Richie Henman, and Miles Goodwin. And they're the ones who came up with the real first American hit for April Wine, which was Hot Chocolate's You Could Have Been Lady and Elton John's Bad Side of the Moon from On Record. Anyway, I want to say hi to some people here. A Music Man. Hey, John, good evening. William Niche, good evening. Neutral 69. I never heard of this band. Oh, God, look up this band. They're one of the greatest Canadian bands of all time. Interestingly, they never had a lot of hits in the U.S. I mean, they had You Could Have Been Lady, which was the Hot Chocolate song, which was a minor hit in the U.S. Then they had Roller, Just Between You and Me, from Nature of the Beast. They had Roller was from First Glance, but then Nature of the Beast. And they did well in the U.S. for a Canadian band. But when you look at, and I do this with Australian artists, where Australia had sort of Canada had a CanCon thing where we had to play 30% Canadian content. The number changed between stations and their promise of performance, their license. But usually the general idea was a radio station in Canada had to play 30% Canadian music. Some people say it didn't help everybody. It only helped the big guys like Bryan Adams and stuff like that. I love Canadian content. Now, I mentioned Australia because Australia had their own version of that. That was intriguing to me, but more than anything, I would pick countries like Australia, I'm Canadian, and decide to sort of cherry pick through things that never came through Canada or, well, in the US, North America in general. So for our American friends who are on here, I suggest if you don't know April Wine, just check them out. Miles Goodwin, their lead singer, the guy who rose to become the leader of this band, he started with the band with our guest. We're going to get to him in a second. David Henman. He had a voice that I would have never picked this guy as the lead singer of a band in a million years, but I would have been wrong. I wouldn't have picked John Anderson to be the lead singer of Yes. Man, I would have been wrong. And John's been on this channel. I even told John Anderson that. And he said, thank you. Thanks for admitting that. So Miles Goodwin ended up being like the major lead singer. Let me just, not that I need any help, but for this segment, and remember, we've got the 3 original members of April Wine, brand new interviews. And Miles Goodwin, we lost a few months ago, the guy who sang most of the hits, Jim Clench, who sang like "Ooh What a Night," the Fire Bell song. Everyone says it's a cowbell, but it's a fire bell. He died a few years ago. I had a chance to talk to him too. So we're going to put together all our interviews, and we're trying to get one last guy right now. I don't mean to sound convoluted right now, but it's just for April Wine fans, they'll know what I'm talking about. There's one guy I'm trying to get right now, and that's Gary Moffat, who was with April Wine for the glory years. So bear with me. We're trying to put together this vast April Wine sort of documentary special with basically all interviews. So before I go on, there's an album called The Feet. It was just 2 feet. There used to be a rumor that it was Anne Murray's feet. That was the first April Wine album. And Fast Train was a minor hit off that Miles Goodwin sang. David, who's going to be our guest, was on that album. Then On Record came out, the album that I mentioned a while ago. And they had, like I said, You Could Have Been a Lady, minor hit in the U.S., big hit in Canada, and Elton John, Bernie Taupin's Bad Side of the Moon. And then came Electric Jewels, Lady Run, Lady Hide, the title song Electric Jewels, Weeping Widow. I should say Drop Your Guns was also on record. Anyway, I've got a lot of comments on here for, I heard look, there you go. Electric Jewels. Love this album. It's also signed where I'm always big. There. It's also signed by Miles Goodwin, Jim Clench, Brian Greenway, who wasn't on the album, but he was gracious enough to, and Jerry Mercer, who was on the album. So, hi, John. Let me just get to a couple of comments. We'll get to Jim Henman. This is a sneak peek, by the way. So every single night I'm going to try to come on and do either a sneak peek or a full volume of some artists that we really want to feature. Malcolm Bruce, we've had to push him back again. We've got so much, oh my God, we've got so many interviews coming up. We can't even keep up with them. So let me get Amy Thompson. I know this about April Wine, but I wanted to say I wish you'd interview Dickie Betts. Well, it's a little too late for that. I tried to interview Dickie Betts. He never got back to me. Please try to get, JMO, yeah. He's the last one, Allman Brothers Band. Thank you, Amy. Nelson Norwood. My friend Frank Baldwin lived in the same building as Miles. Wow. He told me he helped them out with food, etc. In the early days. Wow. By the way, I am a Dalhousie alumni and grew up in Digby, Digby, Nova Scotia. William Nish, a lot of these great rock bands from the 70s didn't have their hits that charted in the top 40. Very true. Brian Biggs, as a 60-year-old April Wine fan, Toronto CNE. Hey, cool. Hey, thanks, Brian. And Northern Grace. Hi, John. So we're going to start. We've got only 6 clips tonight. It's a sneak peek of our whole David Henman interview where you're going to get in the next few weeks a different perspective than just Miles Goodwin's perspective. Miles Goodwin was the leader of April Wine, but this is kind of like, how do I put it? It's kind of like talking to the guys outside. I don't know what band I could use. I'm not sure. I'm trying to think of an example of Ray and Smitty of Trooper for our Canadian fans, talking to the other guys. Just a different perspective. And in the early days, they all contributed pretty much equally, especially on the first and second album. So we're going to, first of all, talk about, where's my notes? My scribbles. This is David Henman, and we'll get to your comments in a second. This is David Henman talking about his parents and how they reacted to everything. But first, let's do a little intro. I remember, and I love telling artists this. I remember years ago with the On Record, because that's one of my favorite April Wine records, and I showed it to someone, and the girl, she looked at your picture and she says, "That guy's a model." I'm going, "What?" No, I'm not showing you this because you can barely see the guy on the cover. I'm going, you can barely see them. They're wrapped up in that record thing. It's like a little clearer now that re-releases somehow you can see your guys' faces a little bit more. But and then she comes out and she I don't know where she got another picture of you, and this is way back. And she says, that guy looks like a model. That guy should be like a solo artist. And I'm going, no, just listen to me. But a woman. So there you go. There you
Yeah.
go, David Henman. You good. By the way, you look great for your age. Good for you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks very much.
How were your parents back then? How were this is all going on? Uh,
Uh, well, my brother and I were both extremely fortunate to have parents that bit the bullet, so to speak. They just never, they're from a completely different generation. We were playing music that was completely foreign to their ears. But we were just so fortunate to have such supportive parents. They set up a rehearsal thing in the basement. We had an unfinished basement, but we had an area that they set aside for us to rehearse. And halfway through a band practice, we'd see mom coming down the stairs with a plate of milk and cookies for us. But yeah, they were extremely supportive, and we found out why 25 years later when they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary or 50th, I think it was. And my brother and I took it upon ourselves to apologize for making all that noise in the house, and they said, "No, no, no, we knew where you were."
huh? Great parents. In the next interview, when we play it, I'll just give you a little sneak peek. Richie, his brother, who was the drummer of April Wine, I learned one of the main reasons, and I say this to a lot of drummers, but one of the main reasons I wanted to drum was because of his brother, David's brother, Richie Henman. We just finished chopping up that interview. High Adventures, the name of his new book. We will have, after I'm finished, I'll put the links into the description. But when I heard You Could Have Been a Lady, which was a hit in the US, big hit in Canada, the Hot Chocolate song was a cover, I wanted to play drums. I never really could figure out what he was doing on drums because it was just an interesting kind of beat on drums. And I had a chance to tell Richie Henman, which meant a lot to me, that I learned to play drums. But he was one of the first guys where I heard that. I'm going, I want to learn how to do that. I want to learn how to do that. The main guy in April Wine was Miles Goodwin. He's the guy who sang a lot of the hits. And there you go. You've got, I always get mixed up here. This was the last album with David Henman. This was the live album that came out after that. Uh, this is Stand Back. I've got a T-shirt for that too. This is Nature of the Beast, their biggest album. One of their big albums. The whole world's going crazy. Harder, Faster, '79. A lot of those albums meant a lot to me. I've got almost every April Wine album autographed by Miles and a lot of the other guys. I had a chance to interview them in 2000. But anyone who's a big April Wine fan, I'll get to your comments in a second, but I just want to get through some of these clips. Miles was the guy. He is kind of like an example of Glenn Frey and Don Henley. Even though I preferred the original four Eagles, I preferred Randy Meisner and Bernie Leadon really just as much in the early days. Eventually, you start seeing who are the guys who are going to create more hits. And in the Eagles, it was Don Henley and Glenn Frey. In April Wine, it definitely was Miles Goodwin and Jim Clinch in the beginning. They're both dead. It's interesting. And Steve Lang's dead, their bass player. So there's a few of the guys gone, but if you're talking a band from that started in the late 60s to 70s, you're going to get a few members who are no longer with us. This is David Henman, again, original creating member of April Wine, along with his brother Richie, the drummer. David was a guitar player, and their cousin Jim and Miles Goodwin. This is him talking about meeting and well, the first impressions, how April Wine meeting Miles Goodwin. I'm looking at my notes here. There you go. I'm learning what I'm talking about.
I mean, Miles was never media friendly. And I'll tell you where that comes from. When we were young musicians, we used to really admire, you had the young musicians that appeared on the cover of Teen Magazine and the cover of the pop magazines. And you had guys like Roy Orbison who were very private. And that we talked about that in the early, the four of us used to talk about that kind of mystique of not being all over the place, all over everywhere, and so on. And Miles, more than any of us, I think, took that to heart of maintaining some, took it to heart on stage. So there was only a brief period uh, in the 80s where Miles became kind of showy on stage, but that didn't last. He was more the kind of guy to walk up to the microphone, look the audience straight in the eye, and deliver the goods without a lot of, you wouldn't catch him doing the splits or anything like that.
Talking about the late great Miles Goodwin, who we lost a few months ago, who was the leader and the lead singer, the chief songwriter, guitarist for the band April Wine. And anyone who lived in Canada would have known April Wine because, unlike in the US, April Wine was one of those A-list bands for so many years. But they didn't win all the Junos, which are equivalent to the Grammys, because it was always someone more important at the time. Trooper, Rush. There was always somebody who was somehow bigger. Loverboy. The Dark Wizard said, "Hey John, I got a copy of the vinyl Big Tree label on records. So love the album. You could have been a lady's great song." Jimmy Martinez, too bad April Wine didn't get much love in the States. Great band though. Thank you, Dark Wizard. You could have been a lady. William Niche, what a good comp for April Wine. And Nazareth and April Wine did a lot of things together. I talked to Dan McCafferty, late great singer of Nazareth. He said they had great times partying with April Wine. Pete Agnew, who's the last remaining member of Nazareth, I had a chance to talk to him, and he just had great memories of just hanging around with April Wine because they did a lot of stuff together. So thank you, William. Brian Biggs, this is awesome. William says, should 38 Special be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? I'm not sure they'll ever get in. There's too many people in before them. The Dark Wizard Room. I so love and enjoy all their records. Wish I had caught them live. I saw April Wine more than anybody else, 7 times. Northern Grace, April Wine, great band. We in the northern U.S. states, big fans. Yes, that's a good point. The northern U.S. states saw April Wine a lot, and a lot of other Canadian bands, right? Brian Biggs, last time I saw April Wine was at the Century Casino Edmonton, just before COVID. Oh, I saw April Wine. The first time I saw April Wine was in Northlands Coliseum in Edmonton because I lived in Edmonton all of the 80s. Brian, you probably know 96 K Light, CKRA, CFRN, CKXM. I worked for all those stations when I was in Edmonton. Nelson Norwood, They Walk Funny. William Niche, I hope I'm saying that right. Love the song Just Between You and Me. That was their biggest hit in the U.S. Yeah, good point. Northern Grace, back in the day, only radio stations we got were out of Canada. Wow. So we're going to talk about how April Wine started. This is David Henman. This is a sneak peek. This interview was almost 2 hours long. So tonight, it's late for a lot of people, just a sneak peek. This is how the band April Wine started. They started in Nova Scotia in '69. Here's David Henman, original guitarist, vocalist, because he did sing back then, of April Wine. So, who brought you into that famous little Canadian band? Was it Jim? April Wine?
Yeah, what it was, we were getting into writing. Jim and I I wrote my first song with Jim. I think we were like 12 years old, sitting under a tree, and I wrote a song that I remember to this day. You gave me reason to forget the only love I ever knew. She left me blue when I found you. You gave me reason to forget.
No way.
We were 12 years old. Anyway, Jim and I were both really wanted to write songs, and we were playing in bars. We were playing cover songs, but whenever we tried to play an original song, we'd get, "Hey, buddy, play something we know, eh?" So Jim and I were getting frustrated because we wanted to move forward. So we wanted to do something. So we got together at the Old Mill Tavern in Dartmouth on an afternoon, I think. We ordered a pitcher of beer and we're sitting there talking about it and decided we wanted to put a new band together. And Jim mentioned that Miles, we knew Miles. We knew Miles, especially with Jim. They had that band called Woody's Termites. Uh, they were an amazing band. They really on every level you could think of. They were an amazing band. They were writing songs. They were playing songs that were extremely difficult to play. They were going from, the Rascals to R&B. Well, maybe that's not such a stretch. And so anyway, Jim and I were talking. He said, I'm going to call Miles. He's up in North Sydney with a band called East Side Sanctuary. I'm going to give him a call and see if he wants to join us and put a band together. So he did. Miles showed up, picked him up at the train station. He had a guitar and a garbage bag full of everything he owned, and that's how that thing began.
That thing called April Wine. Greatest one to me, they were the greatest Canadian band. And again, I'll say what I said off the top. Growing up, anyone who knew me when I was growing up in Northeast New Brunswick, in Newcastle, New Brunswick, Miramichi, New Brunswick, that's where I grew up. I lived there till I was 19 in 79. I moved away to become a radio guy, but I had a chance to see April Wine multiple times then. The last time I saw April Wine, I got free tickets from the guy who's running April Wine now, basically Brian Greenway, who joined in 77. And I interviewed them in 2000. So that's the last time I saw them, in 2000. And after that, I just, whatever, it just didn't work out. Uh, yeah, so that's kind of the thing. We're going to do, let me do some more questions and then we'll get to the Everly Brothers. David Henman talks about some of his influences. And then we're going to talk about his first impression of Miles Goodwin. And then we're going to move on to like just closing off the show for tonight because it's a little late. And I really appreciate you guys being on, and thank you for everyone. Last night we got a lot of donations, which was really, really nice because we're trying to buy a Shure SM7B. I always have to look at it there because I always forget what it's called. We're trying to buy a better microphone for the radio station for our channel. I'm a radio guy for 41 years, so I always call it radio station. We're trying to buy a really good mic that's really meant for podcasting, and right now this is good, but when I'm doing sort of the documentary style stuff, it's not quite as good for whatever reason. So we're trying to buy one of those, and a lot of people gave us donations last night. If you ever want to donate to the channel, there is a PayPal link at the very top of the description of all our videos. So thank you for that. It was crazy last night. Thank you. Appreciate it. So Music Sanctuary, Evening John. I just pulled out April Wine's Greatest Hits album that I autographed by them years ago. Oh, cool. Brian Biggs, yes, for sure. Nice to put a face to the voice. Neutral 69. Do you hear about the new inductees Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? Yeah, we did a thing last night, Joe. Neutral 69. We did a whole thing last night on the inductees, and I was very happy with Frampton and Foreigner more than anything, because I think Frampton is. I was a Peter Frampton freak. When I got Frampton Comes Alive, I immediately started going, oh, Humble Pie, oh, the older stuff. And I bought Frampton's older albums, his solo albums, and I bought almost everything he ever had. I love Peter Frampton. So this is David Henman, original guitarist, and he was a vocalist back then as well. He's still a vocalist of April Wine before Miles Goodwin kind of took over the band. And anyone who knows April Wine would know that Miles really was the guy, like Don Henley and Glenn Frey of the Eagles, who ended up spearheading the band and creating a lot of hits, right? And we lost him a few months ago. This is about the Everly Brothers, David Henman and his inspiration. And then we're going to hear about his first impression of that Canadian superstar, Miles Goodwin, after this clip. By the way, one last thing about the really early days. You had mentioned before the Everly Brothers, hearing them in the 50s.
Yeah. What that led to was my brother and I, we would have been around 9 or 10 years old, standing on the front step of my mom and dad's house, holding the kitchen like a broom and a mop, instead because we couldn't play guitar yet, and singing "Bye Bye Love" and "Wake Up Little Susie." Yeah, the Everly Brothers had as much influence on us as the Ventures, mostly for the vocals. That those unbelievable, to this day, people are mystified by those harmonies. It's just how did they do? I mean, I know it's the sibling thing, and of course that acoustic guitar sound. The only other time I've ever heard such a magical acoustic guitar sound would have been probably Dwight Yoakam, who gets an incredible acoustic guitar sound. Saw him interviewed on one of those shows. Whoopi Goldberg, and then the other one was Stephen Stills, who gets just such a powerful acoustic. I mean, they're not the only ones, of course.
William Nice, thank you for your donation. I really appreciate that. Your super chat. Thanks for rock and roll history lesson. Hope this helps you getting your new microphone. Thank you. Really appreciate that. That's very kind of you. And by the way, yes, I did do a thing on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame last night. Also, comment. Rand B says, "I like to rock great music." Ah, thanks. That I should. I'm saying thanks on behalf of April Wine. I had nothing to do with it, but I love the band. They were my favorite Canadian band. My Electric Jewels T-shirt just ordered. I got that for my birthday for my son Chase, and I got the Stand Back album, which is the one right beside my other ear. I've got a T-shirt of that too. So thanks for all the comments. I really, really appreciate it. The Music Sanctuary. In the 70s, April Wine was, sure, we had BTO, Max Webster, Prism Trooper, Red Rider, Streetheart, and more. But April Wine was cranking out the albums and hits. They were very underrated. I really believe that. And anyone who was in my vicinity growing up would have known that I was like a April Wine fanatic. I loved them. So it meant a lot to me that I had a chance to interview recently David Henman, who was a founding member, his brother Richie Henman, who was one of the reasons I started playing drums, and the cousin who I've interviewed 3 times, who was only on the first album but played with Miles Goodwin at the latter part of his life, which is Jim Henman. When Miles Goodwin was doing the lead singer, the leader of April Wine, was doing the blues stuff, near the end of his life, he played with Jim Henman, childhood friends. They were in a band called Woody's Termites together, and that was a precursor to April Wine. So thanks for all the folks who listened tonight. We got another, and I'll come back and I'll talk to you guys in a second. But this is David Henman and his first impression of the guy who became a Canadian icon and the leader of April Wine, who we lost a few months ago, like I said, who sang most of the hits, Miles Goodwin. What was your first impression of Miles?
Boy, oh boy, he was kind of a bit of a wild character. You know, we were all homeboys. We were all, Miles lost his mom when he was very young, and you read his book. It says he was living with his father and his brothers was kind of dysfunctional situation. So he was on his own from about the age of 11. So, he looked like a wild mountain man to me when he got off that train. We were all nice white middle class, well, lower middle class boys with nice homes and nice clothes and everything. So he looked pretty wild and pretty intense. And that was a pretty accurate, to me, a pretty accurate first impression. He was an intense individual. Um, Later on, he developed a wicked sense of humor, and I wish I had spent more time uh, with him going down that road. But
Of course, so this is after I interviewed David Henman, original founding member of April Wine. I interviewed David a few months after Miles Goodwin passed away in the latter part of last year. It was a shock to a lot of people. He did come on and say that he was not in the best of health, but he was a Canadian icon, and to me, it was like heartbreaking, that's for sure. Michelle Goncalves. Hi, everyone. Love April Wine. Fantastic band. I appreciate everyone coming on tonight. Uh, in the beginning, like David Henman, the guy you just heard, was on the first album, which had The Feet. I should have gotten the album covers ready. The Feet album, and there was always a rumor that was Anne Marie's feet. Of course it wasn't. It was a very ugly feet, but there was always a running joke that Anne Marie's feet were on April Wine's first album, which if you turned upside down, the feet kind of looked like a wine bottle. I never really thought so, but that's what people said. Fast Train was a minor hit for April Wine on that album. But then came the On Record album, which was basically a picture of a record with the faces of the guys posted on there. And the guys were Miles Goodwin, our guest, David Henman, his brother Richie Henman, and Jim Clench. And that band came up with a version of a hot chocolate song, yes, You Sexy Thing, which is not You Sexy Thing, but You Could Have Been a Lady, which was a minor hit in the US and a big hit in Canada. Bat Side of the Moon, the Elton John Bernie Taupin song, which was a hit in Canada, and Drop Your Guns, which was another hit in this country with Jim Clench, uh, 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 um, Miles and Jim were a big part of that. Anyway, Lady Run, Lady Hide followed from Electric Jewels, Weeping Widow, with that was a Jim Clench, and Electric Jewels, the title song. And then the guys were gone. Then April Wine changed into sort of a different band. It was Miles Goodwin still. Jerry Mercer was their drummer. Gary Moffat, who we're trying to get right now, and Jim Clench. And that's what happened. And then they changed a few more times, but April Wine really made a difference in Canadian music. Huge Canadian band. A lot of people have asked me why I didn't interview Miles Goodwin after 2000. Miles was just very grumpy when I talked to him in 2000. And there was a part of me that said, well, I've got an interview with Miles from a friend of mine, Steve Burgess, who we're going to have on the show in the next little while, because he just wrote, where's Steve's book? There it is. The stuff I have on my messy desk. This is Steve's book. Steve, is there a picture of Steve on here? Where's Steve? Steve was my best friend. I saw Steve. We were good friends. When we were single, looking for wives. Steve and I would hang around. Anyway, this is his book. You can order it now, called Reservations: The Pleasures and Perils of Travel. Steve hadn't started traveling yet when we were best friends. When I met Shannon, you know how it is. I ended up hanging out with Shannon a lot more because she was my girl, and so Steve and I kind of drifted apart. And then one day, out of nowhere, Steve Burgess, got a hold of me and said, "John, do you want my interviews?" This is connected to April 1. I said, "Well, what? All your 80s interviews?" Because he was out of radio by then. And I said, "Well, Steve, if you give me your interviews, you like they're mine at that point. I might do something with them someday." I give him portions of the proceeds of the when we go on. But we had to bake all these reel to reels in food dehydrators for 24 hours. Sometimes we'd have to put them back in for 24 hours. We'd have to like dry them out for another 24 hours and transcribe them and or put them on digital. So it was a lot of work, but they were great interviews. And Steve was sometimes Steve would fly the seat of his pants and just go on and do an interview. But he did an interview with Miles Goodwin when Miles was releasing his first solo album. And we've already presented that when Miles passed away. So we're going to have a lot more from Steve. And then, since Steve does a lot of classic interviews, we thought we would talk to him about his book. And Steve lives in Vancouver now. I don't know how to say her. Daz Adhikari. The wine glass is between the feet, between turning upside down. Yes, we did mention that. Neutral 69. What musician is big in America and Canada? Well, most of them are pretty big. Oh, I've got to turn off. Hold on, I've got to turn off my my daughter's coming through on this thing here. Hold on. Sorry. My daughter, who's autistic, we have a baby monitor here. So when she's having a bad night, we need to hear her. And so she's upstairs, obviously. I'm not sure why, which is usually a signal for me to not be on long because we want to make sure she's having a good night. So I want to thank everyone for coming on tonight. This is just a sneak preview of our David Henman. Richie's also an incredibly interesting guy. So these two guys grew up in Nova Scotia with parents who were very, very supportive. And if it wasn't for these parents in that situation and that ideal circumstance, you know what they say, you go back in time, you change one thing, everything's changed, right? But anyway, it turned out this way. And they had a cousin named Jim Henman who knew Miles Goodwin. That's how the brothers got to know Miles Goodwin, who was in Woody's Termites with Jim Henman. And they ended up forming April Wine. So Jim Henman left the cousin after the first album because he worried about himself. He was worried about what would happen to his life if he stayed in rock and roll. And then after 2 albums after this, the Henman brothers left. And then April Wine changed, and they changed again, and they became one of the greatest Canadian bands of all time. So if you're American and if you're watching this, because we do have this simulcast on our Canadian channel right now on Facebook. And thank you, by the way, for the folks who gave us donations on Facebook. I noticed a few people did because we're trying to buy a way better, like a very professional microphone. So thank you. And the PayPal link is in the description if you ever want to make a donation to our channel. Thank you. We're almost halfway there to buy our microphone, which is great. So April Wine changed an awful lot, but for if for the Americans watching, and I am a Canadian, probably 85 to 90% of my audience is American, and that's why I'm putting this on both channels right now, Canadian and my the Canadian channel, Rock History Canada and Rock History Music. That I would be remiss if I didn't say, for people who don't know April Wine, they weren't huge in the U.S. They were certainly huge in Canada. They had lots and lots of hits, one after another. Every single year, it seemed they had a hit on the radio. So that's how prolific they were, and that's how big they were in Canada. But there were always bigger bands like Rush. For a while, Trooper was a bigger band, even though April Wine has many more hits than Trooper ever did. Let me get to a few of your comments, and then we'll wrap it up tonight. Cramo Hop, still remember when Roller first got played in Cleveland? Yeah, in '79. Thank you, Neutral '69. What music? Well, most of the musicians. Are you asking what Canadian musicians are big in the U.S.? Rush, with probably Loverboy, probably the Guess Who, Backman Turner Overdrive. There's a lot of big Canadian bands that were big in the U.S. and the list is long. Music Man. So many great albums by April Wine. My favorite is Nature of the Beast. That was their biggest album. It's right there. That's not the autographed album, but I've got an autographed version of it. Neutral 69 is Michael Jackson and Journey and Foreigner big in Canada. All the stuff that are big in the US, for the most part, are big in Canada. Like all the big bands are big here. There's very few bands that were big in the U.S. that were big in the U.S. that are not big here. So Seattle played a lot of April Wine back in the day. TJ, yeah, very true. So anyway, thank you for coming on. And again, thank you for the donations tonight. Remember, there's a link in the description if you ever want to make a PayPal donation or join our Patreon. I just finished putting up a lot of stuff on Patreon last night. I usually put our Patreon stuff late at night. I'm not sure why I do that. So maybe when you wake up, you'll have a lot of Patreon stuff, but it's all in the description of the video. I like coming on at night. I've been a late, I did the morning show at a radio station. I did the afternoon show. I did the midday show. But my favorite time slot was always working in the evenings. You know why? Because people left you alone. When you were a radio announcer in radio and you worked evenings, because my friends used to say, "Hey man, you're pretty good. Why don't you get a better time slot?" I'm going, I like working evenings. People just leave me alone, right? Because people think being a radio announcer, after 41 years, I always tell people, for the most part, I'm not a very extroverted type of guy in the long run, because I'm in an 8x8 room or a 10x10 room by myself for most of my career. Because they think, wow, you're a radio guy. Not a lot of people say that, but some people say that. And I'm by myself most of the time. So that's the thing about radio. But you get a lot of free concert tickets. And you meet a lot of rock stars. Northern Grace. Thanks, John. Hello to Shannon. She is downstairs with our daughter. William Nish, thank you for the super chat donation. Do something on the 38 special. I plan to, actually, yes. TJ, thanks, John. Have a great night. Thank you, everyone. Love you guys. I don't say that enough because, we're losing rock stars all the time. We lose people in our own personal lives. Our knees go out. Mine hasn't, but things go on with us all the time. Again, I always look up here when I say this term, which is we're all watching the clock. We're all trying to get the best life we can with the whatever amount of time we still have left. And when our rockers die, or our aunt or our brother or parents or whoever it is, it's one of those line in the sands where we go, how much time do I have to listen to great music? How much time do I have to go see great music? How much time do I have to go to Italy because I've always wanted to go there? Or just get in an RV and do some stuff? Or sit down and watch a podcast, a live broadcast with someone. Talk about rock and roll with other people. There's just the list is never ending. All these little beautiful little mother statements about what you want to do with your life. So when I'm here and you're sharing time with me, and I do this with people, I remember telling Bruce Hornsby, "Thank you, Bruce Hornsby. You gave me an hour of your life." And he stopped and he went, "This is in '93 when he released Harbor Lights, the first time I interviewed him." He stopped and he went, "I never looked at it that way." I said, "Well, yeah, you just gave me an hour of your life." And he went, "Yeah, that's true." And ever since then, I always do this, and I do this with you guys, of going, you just, gave some a little bit of your life watching my broadcast, checking out these interviews, so it doesn't go unnoticed. So thank you, and really take good care of yourself. I hate to sound mushy, but I mean it. Take good care of yourself. I'll be back tomorrow. We're going to do a few things. Shannon's going to be with me tomorrow. Hmm. She'll be back. John Bowden, Rock History Music, and as always, take really good care of yourself. Okay.